Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Glacier National Park Conservancy's Glacier Book Club. I am super excited tonight for any number of reasons. As you know, those of you who have been to our program a few times, I'm generally super excited, but tonight especially so. My name is Doug Mitchell. I have the privilege of being the executive director of the Glacier National Park Conservancy. And we are joined by an exceptional author and guest tonight, and I'll introduce her in a moment. But this evening wouldn't be possible without my fellow Big Forkian and Glacier National Park Conservancy fan and supporter, who also owns a great independent bookstore in Tallahassee, Florida, the Midtown Reader and Piebrary. So Sally Bradshaw, thank you very much for agreeing to my call, to saying, hey, I got this crazy idea. Why don't we co-host a book club and bring your people and our people, and let's talk about Glacier Park for a while.
It is an absolute joy, Doug, to be with you and your team and with Andrea Lankford. What an amazing author and what a great program you have. Our family has been coming out to Glacier Park for close to 25 years, and it is a joy to be not only supporters of the Glacier Park Conservancy, but to be able to read with you these amazing stories about the National Park Service. I know we have some Tallahasseans and some Floridians online. However you describe that, I'm old enough that on Zoom, I guess. So we are delighted to have you guys and everyone with us. And I have some friends from Big Fork and around Montana who are on tonight as well. And I just am really, really excited to be a part of this. Appreciate the opportunity and really grateful, Doug, for all that you do for the park. So thank you for that. And Andrea, excited to hear about your great read.
Well, thanks so much again, and I can't wait to get down to the Piebrary. All choices on the menu are number one for me, although we're going to find out what Andrea's favorite is in just a little bit. So thanks again. And by the way, Sally, we wouldn't be able to do anything without you and without the people on this Zoom event who support us so generously. This year, we again were able to give the park $3.5 million in private support, and we are challenging ourselves next year to break the $4 million barrier for the first time. So lots of fun stuff. But really, the exciting part for me tonight is to meet and have you all meet Andrea Lankford. I reached out to Andrea after gobbling up her book very quickly here, as I'm sure all of you did. I have since gobbled up her newer book, and we'll talk about that a little bit tonight. But Andrea is an accomplished author who came to this from the National Park Service, being a ranger at some of the highest profile parks in the country, and is joining us tonight from the foothills of the Sierra Mountains. So Andrea, thanks so much for being with us.
Hey, everybody. I'm really excited to be here.
I talked a little bit, Andrea, about kind of this path. It's not a normal path, go be a park ranger and then become an author. So kind of talked us through kind of how that came to pass for you. I believe University of Tennessee, was that where you did your undergraduate work?
Yes, yeah, and if y'all detect an accent, that's where that comes. I was born in Tennessee, and my dad would take us hiking in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. So early on, I knew I wanted to work in the outdoors, and I loved animals. So I got a degree in forestry, and my first job out of college was a summer seasonal protection ranger position at Cape Hatteras in North Carolina. Now, you talked about how did I get to writing? Well, I knew pretty soon that this was a career that was unique. I fell in love with the Park Service, and so I started keeping journals by the time I started work at Zion National Park in Utah. And so I was keeping track of all the things that I was witnessing and observing, and the people that I was making friends with and working with. And so I think instinctually I knew I was going to write a book about this one day.
So when you talk about journaling, is that something you did with regularity after your shift, or did you do that monthly? Or talk to us a little about how you kept that record.
Almost daily, especially in the beginning. Now, as those of you that read my book know, at Grand Canyon, I got real busy, and I did not write as consistently while I was working at the Grand Canyon. But prior to that, it was almost a daily basis that I would journal.
So when did you know that could be? I mean, there's journaling, and then there's being a writer, and you're a gifted writer. So have you always written? Is that something you felt like would translate easily, or was that hard work?
It is hard work. After I left the Park Service, I was committed to writing a book about my experiences and those of my peers and employees. So I started to practice the craft, and I took classes at UCLA Extension in Los Angeles. My husband was working there. We were living there for a while. And so that I started to learn and study and practice the craft of writing. It is, for me at least, it's hard work.
And at the same time, you were also, because one job isn't nearly enough for you. So you were also transferring or transplanting your life into also being a nurse.
Yeah, I did a lot of adventures. I thru hiked the Appalachian Trail. Beth Overton and I were the first to mountain bike the entire length of the Arizona Trail, just to name a few. But then I knew I had to make a living, right? So I did go back to school and became a registered nurse. I thought at the time I'd be able to work part-time and still do all this outdoor stuff, but I did end up working full-time as a registered nurse.
And you'd seen a lot of the need for care as a park ranger. I think people maybe misunderstand that sometimes as a park ranger, maybe you just tell stories and give tickets, but there's a lot of, as you describe in the book, there's a lot of physical contact, and particularly with people in need. Did that surprise you when you took the job?
A little bit. I wasn't expecting it. I was a protection ranger, what they call the gun toters. I had full law enforcement authority. Also became a medic and did a lot of complicated wilderness searches and rescues, and also did wildland and structural firefighting. Now, when you're young, that can seem fun, all the fun stuff in one job. But when you're older, you realize it's all that stuff for only one paycheck as well. So it can get to be a little bit too much, as those of you who've read my book know.
So, there are so many great stories in this book, and I shared with you earlier that I chose this book as my pre-hike to the bottom of the Grand Canyon book, which may not have been the best choice in retrospect at age 63 to be doing that. But you no doubt had to leave a bunch of stories out of this book. So what are a couple of the stories that you kind of wish you to put in, or that you can tell us about that didn't make the book?
Well, one of my favorites that didn't make the book is a bear story. It's back in Yosemite Valley. I'm about 30 years old. And those bear-proof dumpsters, I don't know if they still have them, but they used to have like a mailbox type slot. You'd pull back, put your trash, put it back in. Well, a mama bear had used that and somehow put her 3 cubs in the dumpster. So I get a call. There's 3 cubs stuck in the dumpster. So I drive out there, and there's just a crowd of campers all surrounding the dumpster. And I'm there assessing the situation. And the mother bear just comes at me. And so she's obviously agitated. So I get my pepper spray out and I just spritz her on the face, and she starts snorting and sneezing and runs off with pepper spray. The public is there. I tell them, get back. They're all hanging around, watching, taking pictures, trying to be in part of the action. So I say, please get back. So I go up to the dumpster and I lift the lid and I look in. I see the 3 little baby bears running around. And while I'm trying to decide what I'm going to do next, I hear a camper behind me say, "Oh, Ranger, she's coming back." So I turn around, the mother bear is just barreling toward me. Now, here in Yosemite, it's black bears only. It's not a grizzly situation, but still, it's intimidating. So she's barreling toward me. I grab my pepper spray and just give the full spray at her. But see, the mama bear, she was now wise. She did one of these duck and dive and then peeled off like a linebacker off the field and went out in the woods. So my big arc of spray missed her entirely. But then I start hearing all this coughing and sneezing. So the bear was smart, but the people were not. They had come up closer, and I had just pepper sprayed the whole crowd. So I said, "See, everybody, that's why I told you to stay back." Well, to make this short story even shorter, it has a happy ending. I did not get fired for spraying the tourist. And I was able to shove a log into the dumpster, and with the door propped up, and the little cubs crawled out up the log and escaped the prison of the dumpster.
That's a great one. We do have the grizzly bear up here, so sometimes that can add a little bit of excitement to a hike here and there. Folks, please use the chat to go ahead and ask questions. And we're going to give away a very, very fancy Glacier Conservancy cap to one of our new friends from Florida. So Gracie will be selecting that and announcing that in the chat here when we get a chance. So there are a bunch of, as I mentioned, great characters, great people in this story, and you probably couldn't kind of fully give us the nature of those. One of them is Mary, right? Who is a key player in a lot of us. Give us an update on Mary, right? This book wasn't written yesterday. So where are some of these folks now? Do you keep in touch with them?
Yeah, Mary Littell Henson is married to another former ranger. They're both retired, and they have two beautiful, successful children. One's an engineer, the other last was maybe working at REI up in Portland. So they're happy. They were working at Lake Mead last, and so they live outside of Lake Mead National Recreation Area.
So we talk a lot in this preservation business about the Organic Act, and this is a fairly sophisticated crowd. We talk about this in the Glacier Book Club often, about the challenge in that act that asks us to really do two contrary things, right? Keep the land unimpaired, and then let a whole bunch of people on it. We're seeing that in Glacier. We will have again this year. We've averaged 3 million visitors over the last 4 years. When George Bird Grinnell wrote after helping create the park, about 6 or 7 years later, he lamented the fact that he had ruined the park with all of these visitors, and there were 6,000 people there that year. So, talk to us from a ranger perspective about, what that challenge looks like. Is that something that you talk about? How do you see that?
So the field ranger, especially the protection ranger, I feel is on the front line, bearing the brunt in a lot of ways of that paradox or that dilemma of trying to protect the park and the people. The ranger credo in my book, remember, is protect the park from the people, protect the people from the park, and protect the people from each other. And so sometimes for the rangers, it feels like they're all trying to kill each other, and you're in the middle to keep everybody safe and everything safe, including the abstract idea of the national parks and the experience within that park. So that's the way I see the rangers. You're in a very real way on the front line of this battle to the balancing act of the mission of the Organic Act.
So yeah, it feels that way. And it also feels that as there have been more visitors and there's more burden on rangers, particularly law enforcement rangers, that without increasing ability to create expenditures, so increased budgets, that it seems to be a negative feedback loop in those terms. Does it feel like if you had a magic wand and you were the Secretary of the Interior, Director of the National Park Service, what do you think where would you start to try and deal with this issue?
Well, with the balancing act, what I've seen at Yosemite, they have instituted a reservation system now. In the beginning, when I was working in the 90s, we're like, ooh, awful. That sounds awful, right? But they tried it during the pandemic, and people liked it. They ended up liking it. Not everybody likes it, but some people were begging for it. Yeah, we want a reservation system. It's just not fun anymore. It's so crowded. So I think that's one thing maybe that should be explored more, is considering that, especially during peak times. Maybe not all the time, but during peak times.
We're in year 4 of a pilot system to try and suss out how that might work in Glacier. And as you know, we have really one road that everyone wants to travel on, and appropriately so. It's magnificent. So that has been a challenge here, because it's we don't have the budgeting to have a huge shuttle system. We don't have 200 bus drivers, in fact, in our community who would drive the buses in the shuttle system. So it's a complicated problem, but I guess it's a good problem to have, right? Because it means that Americans are enjoying our national parks. I mean, do you see it that way? That of problems, a lot of people enjoying the outdoors and being nourished by nature. Is that on balance a good thing?
I would say so. I think it behooves the Park Service as the agency responsible for managing this in the best way possible. It makes their job more difficult. But I do think it's a goal worthy of achieving, where we can keep allowing many people to enjoy the park safely for themselves and for the park.
So you talk a little bit about, I think this surprises people. We don't see it as much in Glacier, although it certainly happens. The law enforcement related to kind of nefarious activities. I think in one story there was a guy with like a pipe bomb or something. Is that, give us an idea, is that a lot of a ranger's experience? Is that surprising? Is it rare? Because I don't think that's when people see somebody in green and gray, I don't think they think about a law enforcement in terms of criminal activity.
It's very park specific. You know, we do like to say criminals go on vacation too. So anything can happen in even your sleepy park, and the ranger could suddenly have to deal with a very high stakes incident like a hostage situation or a shooting. But then you also have your parks like Yosemite and a Grand Canyon, which are like cities. And so they have all the problems that a city or a community, a village would have, a ski town, for example, all those same type of problems. And so the rangers have to be trained and staffed well enough to handle those issues.
And you know, when you deal with this, the new book, and we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but Trail of the Lost, which is also magnificent. The other part of what you spent a lot of time was doing search and rescue. Even in your career, did you see that the technology related to that advance? Are there any ideas about how that might be able to become a little bit easier given technology?
Yeah, that's interesting you bring that up, because that is explored a little bit in my next book, Trail of the Lost, but especially with search and people going missing. But yeah, because technology is getting more people out there and perhaps more people doing dangerous things like social media and selfies and this thing. So that's causing more problems, but it's also potentially going to help. I think eventually we're going to have it able where you could put a GPS tag in a backpack, for example, and this will send out a signal. So if somebody goes lost, we'll be able to find them fairly quickly. Drones are being more and more useful, not only for recovery of remains, but also in real time to find a missing or lost person, or even like bring medication to them in the backcountry, for example.
Yeah, it's really interesting. We've had a couple of fairly high profile folks go missing in Glacier, and the fact that we don't know where they might have entered or when the search radius is problematic. And it takes an awful lot of resources, and it's just tragic, right? You know, just on a personal level. You know, we're going to talk a bit about dealing with that as the Park Service, because rangers are very stressed about that, and have obviously need some support in terms of that. And you talk very directly in Trail of the Lost about people losing their lives to suicide. You know, that happens not just to visitors, but also to Park Service employees. And that again, it doesn't feel like that's maybe what you sign up for when you decide you're going to wear green and gray.
It's not, and PTSD is a real problem within the ranger ranks. There have been several, even not that long ago, suicides of rangers that seem to be work related. The job can be really tough, and you don't necessarily get much support, unfortunately, even from the public and from management within the Park Service. So that just compounds the problem.
So we have and by the way, Grace has put in our winner, Cynthia Henderson. Congratulations. A very snappy Glacier Conservancy cap is on its way to you. So I find generally that writers are also readers. So what's kind of on your bookshelf? What have you been reading these days?
Oh, I got to show you because the cover's beautiful. It's the High Sierra, a love story by Kim Stanley Robinson. You know, as you know, I live in the Sierra foothills, so this is getting me all jazzed now that hiking season is upon us to go out in the backcountry and explore some of these areas that Stanley Robinson writes about.
there's so much good literature out there in kind of the world of open spaces and animals and wilderness. Kind of an impactful book for you. Is there one that kind of stands out as something that you say that this is the kind of writer I want to be when I talk about wild spaces and working in the outdoors?
Yeah, that's a good question, because sometimes I feel like I'm a little on my own beat. Although I am, I'm a fan of Abby and Terry Tempest Williams, but I'm also a fan of the Hot Zone, right? The other nonfiction and true crime like Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil. I'm a big fan of books like that. So I sort of feel like I have this weird niche of my own with sort of a darker look at the great outdoors.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned Larson, because I think a lot of, especially in Trail of the Lost, a lot of the way you write and a lot of the way you bring people into the story is very similar for me in the way he writes. And so that's interesting that you bring that up. So one little curiosity, you talk about your Smokey Bear, your hat being in your garage. Is it still in your garage, or?
It is. I just put it in a big Rubbermaid with some uniform items and other historic items, just in case. So yeah, it's still there.
So we're getting a bunch of questions in the chat, so I'm gonna hand it off here in just a moment to Amy Lucky. But before I do, I just want to talk a little bit about this book, Trail of the Lost, which just came out. Was it earlier this year, late last year?
August.
August, okay, and quickly made its way onto the New York Times bestseller list. And it's about missing hikers on the Pacific Coast Trail. Talk to us about how did you go how did you find that story? I mean, it's in the book, but give us kind of a preview of how you got to being engaged in that story. Big story.
There's a story I just hint upon in Ranger Confidential where Mary and Brian Wisher are on a search and they're looking for somebody. Well, in Trail of the Lost, I tell more my side of that, where I was in charge of organizing that search to the Grand Canyon of a young man who had gone missing there, and I failed to find him, actually, and that haunted me. And so 20 years later, when I heard about this case of Chris Sylvia, who vanished while backpacking the Pacific Crest Trail, he immediately reminded me of that other young man in 1995 I failed to find in the Grand Canyon. And so I believe that kind of compelled me to open up a pro bono investigation in his case. And that's what launched me into the story of Trail of the Lost, where there were 3 young men, all fit and healthy, who vanished, one each year, 3 years in a row, while backpacking the Pacific Crest Trail. Wow,
yeah, it's a great story. Highly recommend it. We're going to put a link to the Midtown Readers site. They have it in the store available for purchase. I highly recommend it. So we'll put a link in the chat where you can just click on there and go ahead and order the book. We don't carry it in the store. Everything we carry has to be approved by the National Park Service, and so this doesn't have a clear enough connection, but Midtown Reader has it available for you. And Amy, I'm going to hand it over to you to ask some questions. In doing so, interestingly, the transition to our next book, which is an author who writes about hiking all of the Triple Crown, and is a glacier fan. Spends a lot of time at Sperry Chalet, and her trail name is Kiddo. And she will be joining us from the Appalachian Trail to talk about her book, Footprints of a Heart, in July. So I'm really excited to have Kiddo with us. It's a neat story. So Amy Lucky, what do you got for us? There's a lot of questions.
Yeah, a lot of questions and a lot of activity. So Andrea, this has already been super interesting, but I wanted to catch you up on the chat a little bit. We have people from California and Massachusetts and Montana, of course, North Carolina, lots of friends from Florida, and all these connections are going on in the chat. And so I made the comment, Glacier has a way of bringing people together, or maybe national parks have a way of bringing people together. So this is just fantastic. I'm going to scroll down a little bit through all these folks: Seattle, Beaverton, Oregon, and one question that came up, and these will kind of bounce around a little bit, but are you still friends with any of your former ranger buddies?
Oh,
or all of them?
yeah, totally. Yeah, we just saw some in Ohio. I was there on a book tour for Trail of the Lost, and we got together with one of our ranger buddies who used to work at the Grand Canyon as well. So yes, definitely. I mean, we're all spread all over the country, but when we get together, it's always like old home week.
Right, right. That's great. And then Cheryl had a question. Have living conditions and working conditions, hours, etc., improved for rangers at all? She just commented it's very hard to learn how difficult and primitive it was for you and your cohorts.
I think in a lot of ways not. That, I mean, maybe in some ways it's even worse. There was just a study that came out, and the Park Service again ranks really low with the employee satisfaction, and the staffing levels just haven't increased to the same amount that the visitation has increased. So unfortunately, I don't think it's any better, and some people might even believe it's worse.
Sure, it's just such a big job. And now with, increased visitation, it's really interesting.
Yeah, and I think, as you know, Amy, we all live in the valley, and it's really difficult to as certainly at a seasonal ranger salary, affording a $2,000 a month apartment, 1-bedroom apartment in Columbia Falls is just not going to happen. And similarly, if you're the Park Service, Glacier's budget this year is $15.8 million. It was $15.9 million last year. We're putting a lot of flour into a much smaller sack, and so these kinds of things are difficult. And I will give the park credit; they're trying to kind of think through this, but it's a very difficult question, especially when you multiply it by, the 150 plus pieces of the national park system. So yeah, it's a challenge
For sure. Eric and Tanya, who always join us for book club and Glacier Conversations, nice to see you. They asked the question, you describe a fair amount of misogyny from the public and fellow employees that you encountered during your career. Can you address that a little bit more? And if you know, do you think that that's changed or progressed over time?
Yes, for me, it was just like another irritant or annoyance or exhausting fact. That's the best way. It was another exhausting factor of the job. And so I'm already exhausted on all these other levels, and you're going to add that I have to deal with that strategically. And so, yeah, it played a role in the whole big picture of why I decided to leave the Park Service. Unfortunately, the Grand Canyon had some even more severe problems in the early 2000s, down on the river. There's a lot online about that. Articles were written about it it sounded even worse than what I experienced. So I know it's still a problem. I've even been asked to try to help, and it's too tiring for me to get involved with it, in any big way, just psychologically. So I'm afraid I think it is still a problem.
Sure. Our next question is from Margaret Notley, who's the chair of our board, and I always really ask Margaret if she'll unmute and ask her questions. She always has great things to say. Margaret, are you up for it?
Well, I'm up for it, but I think I have to tell you that the best bear story I may ever have heard was that one about the mother bear. I mean, those containers are for bear safety, right? And she clearly got the message, and she kept her cubs safe in it. That is just amazing. So as a conservancy, the past multiple years, we've been supporting, and again, this is just microcosm dealing with goings on in Glacier, but it clearly reflects what's going on in the rest of the Park Service, and you've described, but the mental health issues and physical well-being of the rangers. So we've supported a program, local gym owners got involved, and most recently we've been asked to support having a therapist on staff, basically, or on call. So I'm wondering if this is something that you saw worsening during the course of your career. Do you think it just surfaced more? And I mean, don't want to be depressing, but we've heard about the suicides and the work-related ones and so on, and you touched on that. What do you see changing for the better? What can people do to support that?
Well, Well, early on when I started, I'm not sure they even had the critical incident stress debriefings, that then they later had those. And sometimes those are well intended, but a little flawed in how they're handled, but everybody means well. But I've been hearing that, it's not that easy if they're a ranger needing the help to get the help. And then it's really hard. PTSD is a strange, I'm trained a little bit with it with nursing. It's kind of a strange condition because you can have two people experience the same horrible thing, and then one person gets it and another doesn't. And we don't know why. So it just prevented, to be preventative and have the resource available. And if the government's not good at making it available, if there's a private nonprofit who's going to supply that avenue for the rangers, in some ways, that's cool that it's separate from the government, because the rangers might feel more safe using it, actually. So I think something like that would be a great idea.
Thanks for that. Your medical perspective in hindsight, I think, is invaluable in that. And it's, yeah, thank you very much.
Keystone has asked, there were a lot of difficult experiences in the book. And if you had knew at 22 years old that it would be so hard, would you have still pursued a job in the park system?
Yes, I think so. I met my husband at Yosemite. I had wonderful experiences on top of the bad ones. I think what I always hoped when I wrote my book, that a young person would read it and go, oh, this could happen. So they're not surprised, and maybe they could set boundaries sooner. And so, yes, if I could go back, I think I'd still do it, but I'd be better at setting boundaries. I wouldn't work so hard. I'd say, hey, I need a day off, sooner, and not let myself to get so burned out.
Sure. A hard thing to do when you're 22 years old, right? Don't necessarily know any better. We want to do a good job. Also a question from Sally from the Midtown Reader. Sally, would you unmute and ask?
I'm having trouble. Can you see me? Okay.
We can see and hear you.
I love being in Montana right now. I'm really in Florida, in Tallahassee, but I love the background y'all created. This was a really personal, or seemed to be a really personal story for you, Andrea, and you also shared a lot of personal stories of your colleagues. Did you speak with them in advance of including some of those stories? And were there some stories of your own that you felt were particularly difficult to include, and you sort of challenged yourself because you knew that this book was important and that it would convey, a story that is, I think, rarely told?
Yes, I really try to get buy-in with any of my major characters, because they're real people and I'm going to write them like it's fiction. But I want their buy-in, and I want to be as authentic as possible with them as people and show, all aspects of them. So I did. I told them what I was doing, and I did recorded interviews. They got them on tape. So they're very aware of what I was doing. And I often tell them I'm not going to do anything with you that I'm not also going to do to myself. And a writer knows, especially memoir, you've got to go to those deep, dark places in your heart that you're uncomfortable sharing. And for me, in Ranger Confidential, I think it's my low point after Kel Schaefer died. And I felt again like a failure, and I was leaving the service, and he had died, and that was just a real dark, low moment. And so when I wrote that in the book, I think that, and also it was right around the time that I resigned and left the service. And so that was the hardest for me to write.
I'm so grateful that you shared that. And I can imagine how difficult it was, but it definitely, for those who've not read the book yet, I really encourage you to do it. It really gives you a sense of the sacrifice that National Park Service employees make, particularly rangers, in giving us access to these beautiful places. And so I'm grateful that you were willing to do that. I know it was probably difficult.
Grateful's a great way to put it. This book was certainly eye-opening. So I have a few comments. I kind of scrolled down to the bottom. So we will get back to some of these other questions, but I just wanted to read Andrew some comments, and then maybe Doug, I'll throw it back your way for a little change up, and then we can come back to questions. So Lori, welcome to you. She says she's a first-time book clubber. from Wisconsin, and they're a huge national park family. So we're thrilled to have you and your family on. And then a 21-year-old wrote a comment. She says, 21-year-old here, your book did exactly what it intended. I look at the parks with a newfound respect, very necessary side of the coin. What a great comment. And then Victoria says, I'm always nice to the park rangers, but after reading this book, I plan on being even much nicer. And I thought there was a couple more. Sarah said same for that one. Okay, Doug, maybe I'll throw it back to you as I kind of look through some more of these questions, and we can do a couple of things here, change it up a bit. Oh, you're on mute.
Self-inflicted wound there. My apologies. I usually that.
No worries.
I need a t-shirt that says you're on mute, I think. So this is really, really an important conversation, and we have been engaged in this as Margaret, who was our board chair, indicated for some time with the park, because we have unfortunately had, lots of search and rescue and lots of other kind of heartbreaking things happen. And so to their credit, the park came to us last year and said, would you guys be open to helping us fund some kind of on-demand, more immediate service acquisition for park rangers to mental health counseling. And so we, of course, our goal is to get the yes. And so often in these conversations, people say, that was really interesting, but what can I do to help? Well, I have something you can do. We are funding $10,000 this next year for the park to be able to have on-demand digital and in-person mental health services. We are hoping to fund, but it will take contributions. So we're going to put a link in the chat, and if you are so moved to make a contribution, we make that kind of easy, and it would be a restricted contribution that would go just to this project. And we're very excited to be able to kind of, I can say this as a former federal employee, sometimes the federal government's not very good at acquiring services in a rapid manner. And so this is where we can add some value to the relationship with our partners in the park. So if that moves you, that would be great. And again, we couldn't do any of this without you. So Amy, back to you.
Okay. Sarah has a really great question too. Speaking of how we can help, she asked the question, it sure sounds hard to be a ranger, ! How can we support rangers and improve their work experience? One as park rangers, and then just two as American citizens.
One of the best ways is just to be prepared and have an expedition mindset when you go to a national park, so that you're not a drain on them. That you've taken care of yourself and you've planned your vacation yourself. And because some people just show up and go, plan my vacation. That's some tiring for some of the rangers that work behind the front desk, for example. And then the rangers, we don't want to have to rescue you. It might be heroic, but we don't want to see you with a broken leg or a family member that's passed away. So, just pay more attention and read up about what the hazards are in the park. And that the ranger would just be grateful for that. But yeah, I think if you say a nice comment, like, thank you for doing your job, that can help perk up a ranger's day too, I think.
Those are some great ideas. How many times have we as glacier hikers or national park hikers see the person hiking without a water bottle or, in flip-flops, and you're just thinking, what in the world are they thinking? So yes, coming prepared. Let's see. Okay, so Dave commented, I think you talked about this a little bit earlier, but he says he's been working in disaster recovery for the past 15 years, and quality debriefing is crucial for first responders and everyone else who gets involved. So I think you did talk about that this happens within the National Park Service as well, and probably happens even more now.
Yes, the critical incident stress debriefing, I even write about it in my book, and I assume that's still happening, and it's probably even improved the quality of it, I would imagine, although it was, it was pretty helpful back then. I think it's having that a little more elevated a thing for those people who are going to still struggle after that, like we talked about earlier. And that's why this program, I'm going to donate some money to that program after this when you send me the link. So, because I think that's a great idea.
Thank you, Andrea. That's super nice. A couple more. Oh, Mary Pat, I like this question. Do you miss being a ranger or being a nurse more?
Oh, that's a good question. You know, I did nursing a little longer than I was a ranger. And so there was a lot of things I loved about that job as well, but there was a lot of things about that job that stressed me out as well. So I don't know if I can answer that question. There's things I miss about both, but I'm actually glad to be retired right now.
That's a great answer. And I bet some days being a nurse and being a ranger were similar.
Oh, it can be very similar. Sometimes dealing with an unruly patient is not a whole lot different than dealing with an angry mama bear that doesn't know what's good for her.
Let's see. Maya says, you talk extensively about your change in attitude towards the end of the career. Do you think this bleaker perspective is inevitable given the nature of the job, the huge nature of the job? Is there anything the NPS system could do differently to address this?
Well, I don't think it's inevitable. You know, we all have different personalities, and I'm a realist. I think I'm an optimistic realist, but you know, I'll take in the bad stuff and assess it, and then yeah, that happened. That's bad. You know, where other people tend to they do a better job of just focusing on the good. So I'm not sure that bleak perspective is inevitable at all. And then you could, if you set boundaries better and work in quieter parks, you may not get as jaded that way. But there was a second part of your question that I wanted to touch upon. What did the park crews do different?
Different.
You know,
Yep.
my husband and I were just talking about this. We were just talking about this. You know what I think they should do tomorrow? Is they need to give every ranger a free year's pass to every national park in the system. And why they don't already do that is beyond me. And that's something they could do immediately.
That's a great idea. I mean, and it's free, basically. Wow. I mean, just take the senior pass, which I have, and just give them out to the rangers. I love that idea. That's an interesting idea.
Okay, I'm scrolling. There's lots more. Doug, do you want me to ask a couple more and then maybe we switch to a speed round?
Yeah, and
I don't want to miss that.
And Gracie's also going to pick a winner of this signed copy of Trail of the Lost, which I will admit I've already read it, so you're going to get it maybe with there might be a coffee stain or something, but it's coming your way.
I think that makes it even more special. It's already been read. Let me read. Yeah, I'll do a few more here. Carl and Candy also are always on joining us for book club, so we're happy to see them again. They wrote a comment. I spent a lot of time in Yosemite in the 70s and 80s, mainly on the High Sierra Loop. I asked a ranger what type of college degree is recommended to be a ranger, and he said law enforcement. I was really surprised. I thought it would be history, geology, biology, something different. So it's a great comment. And I think that actually comes from Candy, not from Carl, because I think Candy packed horses in the High Sierra. And Brent wants to know what strength you've shown in healing. I guess this comment, what strength you've shown in healing yourself through these difficult experiences by writing about how to help heal yourself in others. Was that a purpose in your writing, a known purpose when you set out, Andrea, or is that just sort of a side effect?
I think it's more of a side effect, especially early on, but now I'm a more mature writer and I realize that often that's what storytelling is for all of us. It's a way to cope with things that scare us or disturb us or trouble us. And so obviously by writing it, you're also having a catharsis over these experiences. So yeah, now I'm fully aware of it, but I think in the beginning I was not.
Sure, that makes sense. Okay, Doug, I'm going to kick it back to you and Gracie, maybe for a minute, and I'll review the chat again.
Excellent. Gracie, feel free to break in when we have a winner. I warned Andrea in advance, and those of you who are frequent book clubbers know that we always have a speed round, both of the book club and the Glacier Conversations. I had to chuckle out loud because in one of the stories, there's a ranger at Grand Canyon, I think Pat Sudeth, who is semi-annoying in the same way that I think I'm about to be. So this is the Pat edition of the speed round. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 questions for you. They're apropos of pretty much nothing. I will introduce a couple of them. But the first one, and you may have already leaned into it a little bit, it's a traditional question for writers. Stegner or Abbey?
You know what? I think I have to say Abby. I like the rebel aspect of Abby.
Definitely a rebel, broke a few rules, including, I believe, where his body is interred. But that's typical. Also, by the way, was in one of the lookouts. Spent a couple of seasons in the lookouts here in Glacier National Park in Numa Ridge. Okay, so to the Grand Canyon, South Rim or North Rim?
I can't say Inner Canyon, so I'm going to say North Rim.
North Rim. Okay, I have not done that. I will not read the book again before I do that, just to not remind myself of all the peril. Okay, so this is some close reading of, I really appreciate when people describe their meals and beverages in books, which you do, particularly in Trail of the Lost. And so I'm going to pick out 2 of those and make you choose from them.
Okay.
Creamy Napa Red or watermelon mojito?
Like for one day or the rest of my life.
It's the
So if it's the rest of my
author's
life,
choice.
yeah, I'm going to say the Napa Red.
Okay, all right, that's fair. That's fair. Now, this is a Midtown Reader Pieberry special. There are 3 pies on the menu. This is only 2, so I've excluded chocolate, and so you're going to get a choice tonight of apple or lemon meringue.
I'm going to do apple.
Okay, apple, very good. I think to only be fair, Andrea, I think we should sample all 3.
Yes.
Just to make sure. And last but not least, this is that we do have a official car of the state of Montana, but the question is Toyota or Subaru?
Subaru.
Okay, very good. That's the right answer here in Montana. It's official state car of the state of Montana. So thank you for indulging our speed round. We got a few more questions to get to. Gracie, do we have a winner?
Yes, we do. Angie Sigel or Sipple. Please email info@glacier.org and we can communicate about sending you your book. And if you're interested in getting a signed book plate from Andrea as well, anyone is eligible for a signed book plate. So email info@glacier.org as well, and I will coordinate getting you a signed book plate.
Awesome. Thank you, Gracie. So before I give this back to Amy, what's next for you, Andrea, in the writing world?
Well, I worked 5 years or more on Trail of the Lost, and I'm just finishing up my book tour. So I'm going into vacation mode, and the goal is to get to a state of boredom, a happy state of boredom, so that I'm open and receptive, creativity wise for my next project.
Well, I would suggest that there's nothing like a trip to Glacier Park to create receptivity. So please think about that. So Amy, what else you got? I don't think we've ever had a more active chat.
I would agree. I think we have about 8 or 9 minutes left. And so this is going to be hard work, Andrea, but we'll get through it. Gretchen asks the $1 million question. How do we keep the park accessible to all, but balance that with protecting the parks from overuse? I like to think that we play a part here at the Glacier Conservancy, but what would you add to that, Andrea?
Well, we talked about being prepared, but also try to travel and visit the parks during non-peak times when there's the rain, there's enough resources so that you're not impacting the park as much. So that's one quick thing that the public can do.
That's great advice. Yeah, I like to hear that. And Joel asked you, younger rangers need more mental health help. than the older part-time rangers, or what would you say to that?
I don't know scientifically, but anecdotally, it might be as they get a little older, because it's also there's a cumulative effect. You're seeing more and more bad stuff, and I think on some of the people when they suffer from PTSD, it's often cumulative.
It's a great point. How about signage and educational concepts? Would boosting more signage, educational concepts around the park to bridge sort of that education gap for rangers and visitors, or and we struggle with this sometimes, does that take away from the integrity of the parks? I know for a while, people were putting benches all over parks, and then they decided to sort of scale that back because it takes away from the wilderness aspects.
I get that point, but I think it has to be some common sense has to be applied. For example, on the top of Vernal Falls at Yosemite, where people are falling off and they'll claim they haven't seen the sign and they crawled over it. You got to have signs warning people not to go in that water there so they don't end up dead. So I think it's a challenge, but common sense has to apply. You want to make it all open landscape like that picture behind you, but if there's a danger there, a sign is also needed.
Good point. And especially when there are crowds, right? In those like super popular spots, it's very easy to miss signage. And lots of support for your idea to get passes to rangers. So let's figure out a way to elevate that.
Yeah, let's all write our congressmen maybe and senators, put some pressure, or I don't know why the Park Service doesn't already do it.
Ooh, this is switching gears a little bit. What's the best hike in Yosemite?
Oh man, that's hard. That's like, asking somebody to pick their best child, right? But I have to tell you, today I prefer to go right outside the park in like immigrant wilderness. So I prefer the Forest Service areas around the boundary of the park. So I can't pick a favorite there in Yosemite.
And then that's another interesting thing that we're seeing, Andrea, in Montana. Since we had a vehicle reservation system, that people have said, well, I'll hike across the highway in the national forest, and then they've said, well, that's really awesome. Or similarly at Golden Gate, right? That Muir Woods, yes, problem to get to Muir Woods one way, but you can go so many other places that I think that this idea of spreading people out to other places it can also be another way to deal with this without discouraging people from enjoying the outdoors.
Let's see, have you ever thought about a nursing specific book? Could that be the next project?
I have I haven't hit on a story yet, but a medical mystery or story of some kind has some intrigue for me.
Would you consider doing fiction?
I've thought about it, but I just think my heart is just more in nonfiction, because I get to research and investigate. And I love writing about real people and the things that real people are having to deal with and contemplate.
Are there any other kind of little stories that kind of or is there a journal, a notepad for this contemplative time that you're having where you're not thinking about the next book? Are there any notes getting taken about check back on this when you're feeling more up to it?
Not yet. I'm still been focused on my book tour with Trail of the Lost and having that forefront in my mind. But since that is over, that notebook jotting down period will be starting soon. Yeah. And that is what a writer needs to do, is just jot down things, because you never know what story or what's going to be important to the story.
What experiences on the book tour have kind of surprised you?
Well, people have been really great about it. I did book tour in Ohio where I let Sally Fowler, the mother, those of you when you read Trail of the Lost, she's a big character there. She's the mother of one of the missing hikers. And she and I got together and spoke to a group of people, and it was really moving and powerful for her to get the support and to see her community interested in the story of her search for her son.
It's interesting too, the various and sundry positives and negatives about technology, right? So you create a Facebook page, and then you know, like police who offer a reward, all of a sudden you've got everything, and you've got to start over again every time someone gets the page. And I thought some of the work on drones is another place that the parks, I think, are evolving their thinking in terms of, you know, we're a no drone park, but there clearly is a use for them in health and safety areas. Do you have any interaction with kind of the kind of powers that be about either of these books? Did you get any pushback from people saying, hey, we didn't really think this was in the right direction, or we'd rather you not talk about these things?
There is always a little bit of that, but not from the officials. And that would be, I would say, somewhat surprising in a good way. The state of California asked me to speak in front of SAR officials, in front of all 53 counties, to talk about the lessons learned from Trail of the Lost, and they were extremely receptive to the tips that I was giving them. And so that's a huge positive. Even there's some talks going on right now about maybe doing something with drones in Washington State with the officials. So the officials have actually so far been amazing. They took the book to heart, you know, and considered it like a debriefing. You know, these are things that we can learn from the past mistakes.
Yeah, super interesting. Well, what an evening. I want to toss it back here briefly to Sally. Sally, I just can't thank you enough for, again, being open to my nutty idea to partner in this. We're going to do it again with any of you from Northern California area. I'm actually going to be in person in November at the Book Passage in Corte Madera. So Dave, I'm headed your way, where we're going to do a story about George Menendez Wright, who you probably know, Andrea, the George Wright Society in Yosemite, and there's an official biography out, and that's going to be our November book. So we're really leaning in to kind of expanding to other parks and this conversation. So it's been really great to have Sally, you bring your team on board. Thanks so much for helping us out.
No, it's been an absolute treat. I really enjoyed the book. And Andrea, we'd love to have you come to Tallahassee anytime for your next book or for one of your current books. We'd love to have you in person. It's just really an honor to get to meet you. And Doug, to you and your team, we're always ready to help Glacier in any way. So just give us our marching orders. Let us know what we need to do. Great.
Well, hey, thanks everybody for spending another evening with us at the Glacier Book Club. Andrea, thank you so much. As I said, you're now officially a part of the Glacier family. I'm Doug Mitchell, and it's just a treat to be with you. And thanks for all your support. Have a great evening. Good night.